it looks like we have a pretty good number of people on the call, so we can go ahead and kick things off. I'm very excited to welcome you all to today's event, Embracing Innovation, Digital Trends in Procurement. We have two very special guest speakers today with extensive experience in the procurement space. The first guest speaker is Deb Franzak, who is the former Chief Procurement Officer at 3M. And we also have Dirk-Jan de Wit, the former VP of Procurement at Unilever and the former Chief Procurement Officer at Covestro. They'll be joined by our CEO, Node's CEO, Ali, to talk about trends and digital solutions in the procurement space. And it's going to be a really good conversation. So thank you all for joining. I'm glad to have you all here. And with that, I will hand it over to Ali to get things started.
Great. I can still see a lot of people filtering in, so I'll slow down the top of the intro a little bit just to give a little bit more time for folks. Thanks for attending. We've got a great turnout, and I'm really excited to tackle this pretty important topic today that many of you guys have asked us about. Where we've received countless inbound inquiries and requests from users of our platform wanting to learn more about our views of the supply chain disruptions, what trends we're seeing in the market, how procurement teams are responding to them. And like Tom said, we've got two amazing guests from very senior leadership roles that know their stuff and can't wait to share their insights on that. Next slide. For those that may not be familiar with Node, we are a software platform built for our industry that gives suppliers the tools that they need to be able to transform how their customers discover, engage, and place orders online. We make it really easy for R&D and procurement teams to find what they're looking for, learn about a supplier's product, request samples and quotes, collaborate with suppliers online, place orders. What used to take months to be able to do now can take just a few hours. Our goal, very simply, is to usher in a new digital era into our space. We've worked incredibly hard as a team over the past couple of years to be able to get to where we are today. And we're solving, from our perspective, some pretty unique challenges in our space. Next slide. Many suppliers and their customers, agree with our vision and have jumped on our platform. We're thrilled to have so many suppliers and large customers of theirs be part of our journey. We're gaining about 3 to 4 new suppliers every day onto the platform. And from our perspective, this industry has never seen anything like that before, which is really, really exciting. Let's go last slide. Okay, so let me set some context for today's discussion. For the past couple of years, everyone has been talking about supply chains. What was once a behind-the-scenes part of business is now the subject at many of our dinner tables. We've all experienced product shortages and disruptions in our daily lives. And these disruptions obviously start at the top of the value chain in our industry. Procurement teams, those folks that are online right now, exactly what I'm talking about. In the face of all this, we've heard firsthand from many procurement leaders that the old way of doing things is starting to change. They've been restructuring their teams, changing incentive structures, putting more emphasis on security of supply, turning over every leaf imaginable to find alternative suppliers. And from our perspective, most importantly, they're leaning into digital more than ever in order to help with all of these internal workflows. Today, we're joined by two amazing guests who are experts in the space with decades of experience managing supply chains and procurement teams at some of the largest companies in the world. I'm going to give a short bio on both that won't do justice on their amazing backgrounds. Our first guest is Deb. She has spent over 30 years at 3M in a variety of different roles, including engineering, manufacturing, operations roles. her last role was as the Chief Procurement Officer, responsible for over 1,000 employees and $15 billion of spend. Thank you, Deb, for joining us. Next is Dirk Jan. He was previously at Unilever, leading global procurement for ingredients, and then most recently, the Chief Procurement Officer at Covestro, responsible for, I think, over 10 billion of spend. Okay, yeah, thank you, Dirk and Deb. You guys are the experts. There's very few people on earth that know more about this topic than you do. So if you don't mind just giving a quick hello and then share anything about your background that you think is relevant, and then I'll jump back in and get this started.
Great. So thanks, Allie. So Deb Franzak, as Allie noted, 30 plus years at 3M. I bring a lens of procurement based off of a broad background. So I have manufacturing operations leadership and capital engineering leadership that I brought into the sourcing role and leverage that within the company as we went through the last couple of years of supply constraints, which I think is something many of us had never seen before. So I look forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, Dirk Jan de Wit, as Ali said, Unilever and Covestro. At Unilever, I did many supply chain roles from, in all the areas like plan, source, make, and deliver. And the last many years in procurement before I switched to the chemical business, Covestro, which is a spin-off from Bayer. And that's where I was the Chief Procurement Officer. My true passion is in the area of sustainability. And how odd it was to move from a role in sustainable agriculture in procurement in Unilever, contributing to the sustainable living plan of Unilever, to a chemicals business, which I actually found incredibly exciting because plastics, in the most ordinary term, are used in so many more sustainable solutions. And also there, I continued my passion for sustainability, particularly in the procurement function and beyond.
That will be a topic of conversation very soon. Okay, so there's 4 key themes that users of Node have asked us about that we're going to cover today. Almost every question or inquiry that we received were tied to these 4 themes in one way, shape, or form. And what I'm going to do is just mention the topic and then let you guys jump in and just share your thoughts. Okay, so the first theme, and this is a bit broad, but I think an important thing in order to be able to set context, which is, from your point of view, especially over the past couple of years, what are the key pain points in procurement that you've been trying to solve?
So Dirk, I'll go first on this one. You can go first on the next one. As I mentioned, security of supply has been one of the biggest pain points over the last couple of years. And one of the things that you drive to reduce that is multi-sourcing. So being able to find dual or multi-source suppliers is something you're working on, along with that supplier relationship to solve continuity of supply. And then likewise with that is the responsiveness of suppliers, and as you work with them to ensure at least your understanding of when you're going to receive goods. And then lastly, maybe another comment around cost, which inflation has been high, and it's an area that all sourcing organizations are focused on.
Yeah, maybe to build on it, just to not look at the past, but at the sort of just past 2 years. I think that it's clear that this has been a period that we have never experienced. And I remember, even during my studies, I learned about the Forrester effect, this bullwhip effect. So someone just gives a crack on a long cord and you get a bigger amplitude to the end. Well, that's exactly what happens in supply chains. So with Corona, when consumers couldn't spend their money anymore and didn't consume, you just saw a huge effect in the upstream supply chain, as much as companies delaying or stopping investment decisions. And then when Corona was over and, demands picked up incredibly quickly again, we saw that there was a shortage of everything. And then we have this human tragedy in the Ukraine, which is the war started by Russia, which led to sanctions to Russia, which led to a shortage of gas, which led to incredibly soaring energy prices, which makes everything more expensive, leading to inflation, again, impacting consumer demand. So in these days, it's an absolute, horrendous job almost in procurement to secure supply, exactly what you just said, Deb. Securing supply and the cost are just unbelievable. And maybe we go in a bit more detail later on. But the other thing I wanted to mention is, and that is not just from the past 2 years, but many years, is the tail end spend. The 20/80 rule applies here. So it's roughly 80% of the portfolio that only does 20% of the spend. So let's be honest, guys, we don't have time for that, to manage that properly. So we hope that there are good tools available to manage that tail spend, or we have distributors taking care of it. But we also all know that there are potentially quite critical products in there, or products that we sole source or single source and therefore are far too expensive. So this is a continued sort of pain point where everyone tries to find out how to manage that best. So these are the sort of pain points I would mention.
So let's talk about tail for a second. Obviously, the disruptions would impact those tail requirements just as much as the larger requirements. I mean, how did you sort of organize your teams to make sure that you could find the right suppliers for that tail?
Well, first of all, it requires really close collaboration with several functions in the business, and depending on what kind of business it is, it often is R&D, where you sort of look for particular materials or new materials, or where you look for alternatives for these unique small materials that you buy, or you look for alternative suppliers. And it's R&D that can pick up things in the market. It's procurement that can pick up things in the market, and that's how you try to find opportunities to source those kind of materials. But then when it's sort of done, you continue with those suppliers just for ease, because it's too complicated to keep spending time on that. That's where you spend your time on sort of the portfolio where 80% of the spend is, and criticality for the business. So when it's done, and you'd rather not look at it anymore. And we all know it's a mistake, but we just don't have the time.
Yeah, and Dirk, I would add to that. I think resourcing in many sourcing organizations is limited. So you have to choose where you put your time. And having visibility to that small purchase that might be critical to you, or even visibility to a tier 2 or a tier 3 purchase that might be critical, became evident in the last 2 years with all of the constraints. But I think one of the things that sourcing leaders are looking for is, how can we better manage the tail? Are there third-party organizations that can help us manage the tail? Are there ways to leverage things like Node or other software platforms to give us more visibility and maybe point us in the direction as to how to reduce that risk? And I think it's a key conversation, because not only did the large supply or large suppliers have constraints, so did sort of those small volume tail purchases.
Sorry to keep drilling in on this, but it's just my curiosity taking over. How would you possibly resource your team to actually go find all the long tail suppliers? Because they're not easy to find. And, obviously that's part of the reason why we built Node, but they're traditionally not easy to find and not easy to qualify.
Right. Yeah, so we use the term fire drill, and fire drills happened when we knew we had a constraint or we knew a supplier was not going to be able to ship us what we needed. And in those cases, many times between R&D and sourcing, we were out on Google searching for suppliers or oftentimes even distributors of the same raw material that we could maybe purchase from if they had excess supply. So I think, using what was available, even 2 years prior and what's available today, many people are still going out to Google to find what's there.
Yeah, you always start from a status quo. Yeah, so there is a tail. There is a huge amount of suppliers and materials or services or you name it. And at least that's how we try to manage that tail, is first of all, do a proper risk analysis. So how important are some of those smaller materials? In how many of our end products do they go? So what's the materiality, of those materials, and what's the risk therefore? And then find out, do we have the right strategy? Is it indeed a unique sourced material, a single sourced material? Are there alternatives in the market? And that's where it becomes difficult, Ali. So who can actually, who could be alternative suppliers to deliver such a product according to the right specification, etc. And you will still need to test and before you can actually accept it. So close collaboration with R&D, and as Deb says, just searching and talking and to people in the market and just trying to find alternatives for or the critical or the expensive or risky materials.
Did you have a sort of expectation in place with your team where they could never be single sourced and that they had to hit Google and find everything that was possible?
We had
Unfortunately,
some of those. Yeah, we had some of those situations where you have a material that is so critical that we found out this is so critical, we should not rely on just one supplier. We have to find alternatives. And that is a big search. And it could take easily a year or more. Even if you have a supplier, if you find one after 6 months, then you need to start testing if the specification is truly working out, as expected. So it's a long process.
yeah, and I would say, Ali, we had a strategy for multi-sourcing, but it wasn't something you could execute overnight, in part because you've got R&D resources working on growth projects and a subset of them working on substitution projects. So there's a resourcing cost component to it. So we had goals to drive increased dual sourcing on those critical products over a period of 5 years that we were driving as a strategy, even before COVID.
Got it. So just to make sure I understand how it works, procurement realizes they're single sourced. That's a single point of failure, and then you work with R&D to say, look, like we've got to find alternatives. We need to be able to qualify alternatives. And so you go out and do the research and hit Google, or procurement's going to hit Google?
It's a mix of both, depending on who's driving it. In some cases, R&D takes leadership on the project, and in other cases, sourcing does.
Got it.
And it's anyone in the business who, being out there in the market, talking to customers, talking to suppliers, being at conferences, people talk and they pick up ideas, and therefore it's so important that, particularly in the procurement functions, you're well connected to everyone in the business, and that when people see an opportunity, they come to you and share it, and then you jointly find out if that is a good opportunity.
Got it. Last question on this theme, and then I'll move to the next one. When you're looking for alternative suppliers, how long does it take to find them and qualify them?
So finding can be hit or miss. In some cases, you may reach out to a supplier that has a specialty already in the area, for example, adhesives. You may know who the 2 or 3 big players are, and you might just reach out and say, we have a unique need. What do you have? You're also out on Google searching for products based off of specifications and needs. But as Dirk said earlier, qualification, especially if you have to qualify internally and then with your customers, can oftentimes take a year plus. However, we saw during COVID and all the constraints where you couldn't get products, you could potentially accelerate that to maybe a 6-month window, even with your customers, if the alternative was they weren't going to get any supply. So under a fire drill, maybe 6 months. Under a normal path, 12 to 18 months is pretty common.
Yeah, same experience. Yeah, nice that you mentioned the Corona situation. With shortage of supply, everyone becomes a bit more creative and willing, to. It's also a big process when many people are involved. But then when the heat is on, everyone is running, so that helps. Yeah.
Got it. We've already touched on some of the second theme, but it'll be a good sort of another context thing. What, from your perspective, are the key trends in procurement, or what was at the top of your key initiative list? Like, what were the key things that you were trying to solve for?
Yeah, shall I start with that? So it is always continuity of supply and cost. That is sort of the bread and butter of procurement. But then where you can make a true bigger difference and sort of contribute to the company's vision and strategy is in areas of sustainability and innovation, big time. So that is where procurement, with the huge sort of supply base that you have and creative, clever minds in many companies that you have relationships with, you can really make a big impact. And funnily enough, sometimes that's forgotten in a company where you ask, what are your sources of innovation? They talk about employees and about customers and consumers and you name it, and they often forget suppliers, of which you have thousands. So that's a big source of innovation. So those are for me really the big trends. But sustainability is one that I think stands out. It's, I hope, not a trend, but because it's a clear sort of need in society and therefore a requirement for business if you want to have a future existence and if you want to have future competitiveness. So it's where business can really make a positive contribution even. So sustainability is a big thing. Did I mention digital? No. And digital, because of how technology has advanced, it's beyond the big end-to-end transactional systems that we have. It's moving into new spaces that can support exactly the things I mentioned, even in the area of innovation, sustainability, and running processes better.
Yeah, and maybe I'll add in that digital space. I have to believe all of my peers had some level of a digital strategy. And as one side, you look at the transactional side of source to pay, issuing POs, receiving invoices, and paying. But I think you look at that broader umbrella, when you think about source all the way to pay, you start to think about how do you reduce risk, looking at financial, how do you do audits, leveraging the new technology that's out there where maybe you can do virtual audits. You think about your contracting strategies and how can you leverage live contracts that you can, check against both pricing and terms, but give you visibility when contracts are coming due. Look at tools for how you go out to bid. So there's a whole bunch of things that have changed in the how to source space because there are digital solutions out there. The other thing that I think became a differentiator for companies was data. Whether or not you had a digital twin of your supply chain, including your suppliers, whether or not you had unit cost data at your fingertips that you could leverage indices and feedstocks and what was going on in the marketplace to better understand what was changing. And I think that space has been dynamic in the last 2 to 3 years, and it's only going to continue to accelerate.
Uh, one question that comes up all the time from suppliers that are on our platform, we get literally asked this all the time, which is R&D and procurement really spending as much time online to discover and find suppliers as you say they are? Our answer is obviously overwhelmingly yes. But I think hearing it from you directly, and we've already touched on it and how much like Google search you guys were doing. One, I'd love to hear you guys' perspective on like exactly how much time your team is spending there. And then two, is value creation through digital really becoming a more important topic in procurement?
On the first topic, so the time you spend with R&D, all depends on how you manage that relationship and how you involve them in your procurement effort. So at Unilever, it's more than 10 years ago, I actually organized the first Partner to Win event. So we for 10 years, that has been the way of doing procurement, Partner to Win. They now changed it to Partner for Purpose. Very clever. Partner to Win. And the first event, I remember we invited senior marketing, senior R&D colleagues, and about 40 suppliers that we all put in different rooms. And we asked those suppliers, without slides, to inspire our business leaders, in R&D and marketing. And that worked out incredibly well. And it sort of led to the formation of joint business development plans with the truly strategic suppliers that we could align with, that had, the same interest in their strategy and that wanted to grow with us, obviously. And we made those senior marketeers or R&D people the sponsor of such a relationship. Now, then you hook them on, you get them going. And the same in Covestro, I would say. We even had in Covestro certain individuals in the procurement organization who worked with R&D. Full stop. They were in the team with R&D to work on alternative materials because clearly, the big vision is to move away from fossil fuel-based feedstocks. So what are the alternatives? The R&D guys have the sort of know-how, the material know-how, and the procurement person has the market know-how and knows where to go. So close relationship. Shall I, before I move to the second point, first give Deb a chance on that point?
Yeah, to add to that, one of the things that, we realized we needed 3 years ago was data on where we had single or sole source risk. And it wasn't just by spend, it was by product. So we were mapping out the supply chain for some of our most critical products back at least to the tier 1 suppliers, and highlighting where we thought there was risk so that we could create on the front end some productivity that would point people in the direction of where we needed to look at multi-source. And then the question becomes, how do you find that information? One of the things that we did as a company is we embedded a director from R&D that had worked across many of our businesses, strength in the chemical space, into sourcing, sat with our sourcing team. Mike reported to our R&D leader, but dotted line to me to help us find some of those solutions that maybe weren't as simple, and to also work with our strategic suppliers and bring that information back to the divisions that he knew could leverage it. So I think that partnership with R&D is absolutely critical. However, one of the things that I would add from a time standpoint is once you know you need to look for an alternative, our teams in sourcing continue to get younger and younger. They continue to want to have digital solutions at their fingertips. And they're looking for ways to more quickly find who are the suppliers, what are their capabilities, how can I research things on my own, and then when I'm ready, reach out to the supplier to ask questions. You know, in the old days, I think there was a lot more phone calling, a lot more maybe front end research, and then asking questions. So if we can find ways to improve the productivity of that category leader, to find the suppliers, find the products, self-service, I think it's one of those things that goes into a digital strategy that helps you become more productive.
Yeah, what I could add, on the sort of digital side, Ali, is I always talk to them in procurement about two simple terms. It's you buy smarter or you buy better. Buy smarter is you increase your efficiency in the whole process. And buying better is focused on the value creation. So how do I create more value? How do I get more, for my money? That second part is where the biggest value is, by the way, in my experience. So buying smarter, more efficiency in the process. And we're all aware, of the big end-to-end systems that are there. That also cover the whole transactional procurement space. And there's still room for improvement, still room for improvement to do that better. And it's nice to see that there are also smaller applications from smaller startups that are flexible, agile, that can help quickly and implement and do those things. Or if it's in process mining, just to see where you actually waste your time. Or if it's in the data space, very fair point that Deb raised. In buying better, it's really how do I gain more know-how? How do I get better information to buy even better, to close a better deal? And then you get into the space of artificial intelligence, tools that can help in that space. Or get to more transparent marketplaces where you can see who is actually offering, who's asking. So really an open place where buyers and sellers meet, sort of a window to the market that allow you to buy better. That's, the sort of big wish for procurement.
I would imagine there's a natural sort of tug of war between R&D and procurement, where R&D wants to go out and find all sorts of suppliers, innovate, meet marketing claims, all that sort of stuff. And then procurement wants to restrict the number of suppliers. How does that, how do you break that tie?
Yeah. One of the things we did in 3M was we had what we call business sourcing managers, and they were the liaison between the businesses and sourcing. And part of what we wanted to do was to ensure that in those early stages of new product introduction, we were aware of the needs of R&D. And even though we gave the R&D individual latitude to do their own searches or to come to sourcing to assist, we wanted to be aware. And part of that was if the alternative or the raw material could be purchased from one of our existing contracted suppliers that we had familiarity, we wanted to guide them in that direction. But of course, there are situations where there's very unique needs that might require you to bring on a new supplier that you haven't used before. And one of the key things then we wanted to do was to just validate the supplier, both financial strength and ability to source and supply us as needed, before we got into a situation where R&D had already qualified a raw material supplier, only for us to find out maybe there were some issues. So it's really about that partnership early on to try to reduce that risk again.
Yeah, similar experience. There is this natural sort of tension, Ellie, and for sure, it happened in the past, and I'm sure it still happens occasionally, but less because of the relationship with R&D, that they do a great effort, come with an innovation. They found a particular player in the market who, developed the right thing with them. And then R&D comes to you and says, oh, by the way, that's the supplier, just, can you make a contract, please? This will still happen. And how to prevent that is, also as Deb says, but really involve have people in your organization that work, targeted closely with R&D on those opportunities. And in the end, they will see the benefit as well, because for really critical materials, being single sourced is sometimes painful. On the other hand, also the key development you do with a certain supplier is to be acknowledged, and that you develop that with that supplier and come to something is good. But it helps if you then have a commercial person who is very clear about the terms under which you do that, and that there is no inflation moving in the price year after year after year. So those are things you need to be clear about, and then it works perfectly well. So I think it really, you can't do without each other. R&D can't do without procurement, and the other way around. You need each other to look for those new opportunities.
Yep. Let me go back, Deb, something you said earlier, which is like, how much of that buying journey is procurement R&D going through before they engage with a supplier? I certainly have a point of view on this. I mean, we have a bunch of data to support, how far we think they go, but like, what did your team tell you directly? Like, how far did they want to go before they said, look, it's now time to engage?
Yeah, I think individuals want to be able to use their computers, use the internet, use whatever data is out there to do that first brush of what might be available, whether it's from an existing or a new supplier. And part of the things we were challenging our team with was to think more broadly than the supplier that was close or in your backyard. I mean, we frequently have relationships with the strong US suppliers in the US, within Europe, same thing. How do we think about suppliers that are capable of shipping or even distribute outside of the continent that they make on? So we were asking them to think more broadly, to look for new sources of supply that maybe are ones we could partner with, that were, even bigger companies, but ones maybe that we hadn't used so much in the US or from Europe coming from the US. I would say early on that finding what might be out there, people want to self-serve. But there gets to be a point then where you have to ask some questions. And that's then where you want to be able to engage. And you either can engage through Google onto a website. Oftentimes they have a ask a question or, contact, or through, if you think about what Node does, it allows you to have that collaboration right there on the website and in an easy way that I think is helpful to the sourcing professional.
Yeah, one of the most critical things is the specification, the sort of formulation. Is it REACH compliant? Is it, all those really critical things for key materials? If you Google or in whatever way, you won't find it. And that is where you need a platform that offers that kind of information. Yeah, and I didn't want to do a sales pitch for Node, but that just is, that looks pretty good in how you have the key specifications available, etc. And you can easily get into contact with the supplier. That is really making a difference.
Kind of slightly off topic, but it is, in your org, did you noticeably see your teams get younger?
Absolutely. I think we saw the organization shifting over a period of about 5 years, where I think we had senior professionals that had spent their entire career in procurement retiring. And we would blend that as we brought in talent from outside the company. Maybe a third of our hires were experienced, and 2/3 of our hires were either new college grads or individuals with 1 to 3 years of experience coming to 3M. And the benefit of bringing in some of that talent that maybe had 1 to 3 years is they were bringing with them solutions and productivity and ideas of how other companies were doing things. So it allowed us to challenge ourselves on maybe some of our older processes. But also, I think that organization, the younger or maybe newer to procurement individuals are challenging us to bring them more tools.
My experience, particularly in Covestro, is that we also had good exchange between marketing, sales, and procurement functions, and that was quite interesting. And the chemical industry is quite incestuous anyway, so your customers are also your suppliers and the other way around. So I can't say if it really became younger, but sort of a good diversity in experience, at least. And I think that was also important. The other thing is, yes, the younger generation might be a bit more digital savvy. That is true. But sometimes you want to go even beyond that. And I remember in my sort of internal procurement intelligence team, we had, let's call it a quant, just a incredibly clever guy who, without any particular tools from the market, but his own tools and cleverness, used artificial intelligence to really do great prediction of market movements in a particular material segment, which helped us tremendously in choosing the moment for negotiation and closing the deal. So those are also special characters you wish to have in a procurement organization. And if the older generation, if you want to call it like that, it's not necessarily about age, it's about interest. And if you get those people enthusiastic and excited also about new tools, and they see what you can do with it, they will take it and go with it. I had a great example of that. It was not particularly a young person, but he just went, for e-auctioning and set it completely up because he saw the potential of it and did a fantastic job with it. So if it's the right tool and people, know, yes, it's a bit of effort, to use it, but then if you have it in your fingertips, it's a great help, they will go for it.
Yeah, Dirk, one of the things I'll add as you were talking is one of the things we struggled with was how do you maintain the history either with existing suppliers or existing strategies within certain categories. And, SharePoints or shared folders always exist, but not only do you have individuals that might move from one category to another, but you have this, new hire or new to the company coming in that needs the history of what we've done before. So some ability to have the information, in your, for example, whether you're looking at alcohols or polypropylenes or polyethylenes, what have we done before? Who have we used before? Who have we investigated before? I think it's extremely valuable to have that history available. And again, you start looking at what are the tools that are out there for individuals to leverage.
Very good point.
Another challenge that we hear pretty often is that even within the relationships where, it's strategic, right? So you know who your 10 most strategic suppliers are. It was sometimes hard to, or what we would hear is that even within those relationships, it's hard to navigate the catalog and understand exactly what's there, what they have, where they have it, because it's not transparent. It's not available on the website. Traversing these catalogs on the website can be quite challenging. And so what we've heard countless times is that it forces procurement to pick up the phone earlier than they want to, even within their most strategic relationships. Did you guys run into that a lot?
Well, that is one element of it. The other is that every company does its own thing, and therefore the look and feel is different everywhere. So it is also a bit cumbersome, you know, from let's say a sourcing perspective, or if you want to reach customers or think of a customer, you know, that they, yeah, for even the big suppliers they have, you go to different environments and need to try to find out what they all have. So it's also just the look and feel of it, yeah, and the easiness to work with it.
Yeah, one of the things we tried really hard with our strategic suppliers to ask for a single point of contact. And part of that was to break down these barriers across multiple business units. And we, in turn, would also have a single point of contact. So if you think of a large chemical or polymer supplier, sometimes it's easier then to pick the phone up to your key account person and say, I'm looking to get some information that is in this business unit. The website maybe isn't as easy to navigate to find what I'm looking for. Who can I call? What's the best place for me to look? So you use those strong relationships to sometimes knock down those barriers, especially if the websites aren't easy to get through.
It just slows down the process quite a bit, though.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've run through all the themes. There's a bunch of questions that came through. Let me go through some of them. There was lots of questions around what tools and technologies you guys were using. I don't know if we want to get into that. You know, we've touched on some of it in terms of like pricing tools, analytic tools, search engines, maybe some long tail procurement software. I assume you guys don't want to call out specific names, so I'm happy to skip over all those questions unless there's something specific you guys want to add.
It's probably best not to reference certain companies, but I will comment that in some cases, depending on the complexity of your own company, you have to do some things internally. So doing a digital twin, we did internally. And adding unit cost information, we did internally. But then we were looking at, from the transactional and steps across category, where could we put bolt-on solutions to help us be more productivity, even though we maybe had internal data as the starting point.
Yeah, I would say, you know, Covestro, with roots in Germany, you wouldn't be surprised that SAP is an important sort of backbone system, and that as procurement, you also consider that. We also looked at other things, and in the end came to the use of SAP Ariba, which I always said it's called SAP Ariba, but it's actually SAP and Ariba. So, you know, that says something. But and I wouldn't mention other sort of tools and names because that's not the way to look at it. What could be right for the one is not potentially right for the other. We very much looked at those kind of open markets, those, you know, platforms that that were created, particularly in the chemical space. And a couple of years ago, it was clear it was still very, very sort of, you know, green area. It was certainly not enough for us to get close to any sort of transactions or even dealing. But that has advanced. So, you know, I think there is there are interesting tools out there. The thing is, whenever you think of interest, do a pilot. Do a pilot. You know, and of course you never go full-fledged, but it's particularly with those kind of smaller startups that start with totally clever things. Just find out if it works. You know, do a pilot.
There's lots of questions that came through related to how to assure security of supply, best practices for managing tail spend. I'll hit a couple of them just because there's so much interest on these. This one says, I agree that security of supply is the most important. However, it's difficult to approve suppliers given all the paperwork that's required internally. How did you guys deal with that?
I referred to it a bit earlier that we did really a big analysis of the tail, finding out how important each material was in the sort of end product and in how many end products did it go. Yeah, you can have a small material, not a big volume, but if it ends up in, I just name it, 25% of your portfolio, then it's pretty critical. Although the volume is small, but it's a critical element in that whole portfolio. So that analysis first is important. So how much of the sort of turnover of the business depends on those materials? That's one way of looking at it. And then it's sort of, the suppliers that are behind it. So how reliable are they? What is the track record? How much growth do you see in particular materials? So what's the risk in expanding it? So to drill it down, because this huge portfolio you can't tackle, but really just go to that criticality analysis and then find out, okay, this is the top 50, let's say. Let's start with that and find out if we have alternatives for that. Then how to look for alternatives for those materials. That's where, clever things come in place, like a good marketplace, and just search for the alternatives. So that's a more effective way of doing it. And as Deb and I also already said, we have the same experience, apparently. If you then found a supplier, there's still a process to go through. So you still need to get the approvals. You need to get R&D willing and enthusiastic to work with you on this. And then you need to do tests with the customer before it's a tick in the box, and therefore limit it to the most critical materials.
Right. Yeah, and I think, just to the idea of the physicality of setting up a new supplier, there's workflows that we set up to try to minimize the activity to set up a supplier, because marketing has to put some information in, R&D, procurement all have to put information in, and then ultimately approve a supplier after you've done some level of auditing. That process you want to try to drive as efficiently as you can. To me, the bigger issue was finding the right supplier and gaining the support from the business and R&D, and in some cases manufacturing and procurement, to resource the activity. And one of the things that we had done that we were having success with is our business general managers also had to own a component of what they were doing to reduce risk along with sourcing, because the general managers own the resources in the R&D business space to step up and say this is a priority.
Well, let me just round robin a few more questions. This one says, Dirk, you mentioned companies often forget about suppliers as a big source of innovation. Why do you think that suppliers aren't invited more into the labs and procurement process?
Well, there are things like pride. So R&D people are also proud people. And just as an example, at Unilever, I remember there was someone in the margarine business. It's not of Unilever anymore these days, but he said, who's going to tell me something about margarine? A company that has started it, 100 years ago. So it's this sort of pride that people have. That's one. So you need to get the R&D people sort of enthusiastic, inspired by what suppliers can deliver. So it's really bring them in touch with them, invite them to some supplier visits. I always used this example. That was a very senior business leader who we once said, well, what about, I can talk about margarine because it's out of Unilever's business anyway. You have an aluminium foil on a tub. And if you tear it off, then you know that has a certain freshness. And there was a supplier, packaging supplier, who had an alternative bio-based material. And we said, hey, sustainability, cost, fantastic. So isn't that a great thing? And it would save millions, you know, if you take the amount of product you make. And he said, well, over my dead body, we're not going, because, you know, it's fresh and you need aluminium, etc. And then I invited him to a visit to that supplier. And the supplier had a big room with all sorts of samples. Also one with a tub with the bio-based film on it. And I thought, oh my God, if he now is going to see this, then the whole day is gone. And he picked it up, he tore it off, and he said, that sounds very fresh. So the bio-based material sort of made the same sound as aluminium. With all respect, but as a procurement guy, I never listened to the packaging. And that is just an example why you need to invite those people, because they look and feel and taste, you know, different. And that's how you get people enthusiastic. So maybe I lost the question, but it's really, you get people enthusiastic by letting them, exposing them, you know, to what suppliers can offer, because they will listen differently, and they will be triggered differently than you as a procurement guy are. And that makes it interesting. So that's how you really, you know, get to a better cooperation. And then they come to you. Then R&D people will come to you even and say, gosh, you know, do you have other suppliers? Because these are the kind of needs that we have. Which suppliers do you think we could speak to?
Yeah, I mean, just as a side point to riff on that for a second, you know, what we've heard a lot from R&D is, you know, they're in the lab, they're doing certain things, and there's a moment where they have a certain idea. And it's in that moment where they want to be able to interact with the supplier and ask questions and be able to, you know, understand how they think about it. But because sometimes it takes so long to get a response, or you can't find the right technical person to ask the question to, they just go back in the lab and they forget about it. And, you know, what a massive missed opportunity for like suppliers and R&D to be able to interact, because like it's in that moment where they've come out of the lab, they're sitting at their computer, they've got an idea in their head, and they want to connect to the expert, and they can't.
Yeah.
Massive missed opportunity from our perspective. Okay, one last question, and Deb, this is I think to you, because you touched on this. How does having a diverse group of procurement specialists with varying degrees of experience impact how you view software's role in procurement?
Yeah, I think for us, as we thought about our digital strategy, we actually put a team together, and we were very intent on having individuals that had sort of a breadth of experience in the sourcing space, and also a breadth of experience outside of procurement. So maybe a few individuals that had come from logistics or one of our businesses or finance, to participate in how we thought about not only the tools that we put at the fingertips of our category leaders, but also how do we guide our partners for what they need from procurement. And that gets back to, how do you find suppliers? How do you find product? How do we think about self-serving? And having that diverse thinking on the team was really critical, especially when we brought individuals in that maybe hadn't grown up within 3M.
Yeah.
So collectively, that helped us sort of define our strategy of what we wanted a day in the life of a procurement specialist to look like 5 years from now, and then to map out what the interim steps were going to be in terms of tools that we wanted to develop.
Cool. Look, we're right at time. Deeply appreciate it. There's a bunch of other questions that came through that we don't have time for. So we'll follow up with everyone offline or through email. thank you guys for all your time. It was super insightful for me and helped validate a lot of the things that we're doing internally. So very much appreciate everything that you guys suggested. Any final comments before we end?
No, enjoyed it, and at Covestro we always said, be curious, courageous, and colorful, and I wish that to everyone. Be curious, try things out, be courageous to do it, and bring colleagues with you to do it, because that's the colorfulness, the diversity, to really make it happen.
I love that.